Tonight, we explore the story behind a name we speak every day, but we've forgotten the price that was paid for it. For millennia, the tale of Zeus and Europa has been told as a romance, a divine adventure. But beneath the poetry lies something far more primal, a story not of courtship, but of capture. A deception so perfect, the victim mistook her abductor for a gentle beast. So, before you accept the legend as it's told, ask yourself, what does it mean when your name becomes a place and your story is no longer your own? Like the video, subscribe, because tonight we sail back to the beginning and learn how a single choice made in a sunlit meadow can cost you everything you've ever known. Before she was a name on a map, before she was a continent, Europa was a girl who dreamed of being torn in two. The dream always began the same way, not with a sound, but with a silence so deep it felt like the bottom of the ocean. She stood on a shore that was neither sand nor stone, but a line drawn between two worlds. On one side stood a woman who looked like her mother, her aunts, every woman she had ever known from her home in Phoenicia. Her robes smelled of cedar and the markets of Tyre, and she called herself Asia, her voice warm and familiar. On the other side stood a stranger, a woman with eyes the colour of a stormy sea and hair like spun moonlight, her face beautiful but foreign, her name a secret she kept hidden behind her lips. This nameless woman reached for Europa, her touch cool like the wind off a distant, snow-capped mountain. Asia would then grab Europa's other arm, her grip fierce and possessive, and the fight would begin. They did not speak, they only pulled. They were not fighting for a princess, but for a piece of the world, a prize, a future. Europa felt her body stretch, not in pain, but in a strange, impossible longing, as if she was meant to be divided. The dream never had an ending. She would simply wake, her heart a frantic bird in her chest, the scent of saffron from her royal bed linens filling her lungs. The feeling of being pulled apart lingered long after the sun rose over the harbour. It was a phantom ache, a profound unease that settled deep in her bones. The world outside her window was solid, predictable, a kingdom of straight lines and ancient laws. But in her soul, a chasm had opened. She would walk through the palace gardens, her handmaidens chattering about silks and suitors, and she would feel the phantom pull of the nameless woman, a ghost from a land she had never seen. It was a longing for something she could not name, a destination that did not exist on any map her father owned, a whisper of a world beyond the wine-dark sea, waiting to claim its half of her. Her world smelled of salt and cedar. The salt came from the great sea, a constant whisper on the edge of her hearing, the breath of a vast, sleeping creature that defined the borders of her life. It coated the stones of the harbour in Tyre, where ships from Egypt and the Far Isles came to trade, their sails like white birds against the endless blue. The cedar came from the mountains that rose behind the city, their peaks shrouded in mist, their slopes dark with ancient forests. It was the scent of her father's throne room, of the very walls of her palace, the smell of Phoenicia itself, solid, dependable, and eternal. Every morning, Europa would wake to this blend of sea and wood. a perfume that told her exactly who and where she was. She was a princess in a kingdom built from the strongest trees, looking out over an ocean that promised no passage. Her days were woven with the same precision as the tapestries in the loom room. A morning walk through gardens where the fountains sang a tireless song. An afternoon of lessons in poetry and statecraft. An evening of feasts where wine shimmered in golden cups. She wore silks dyed in the famous Tyrian purple, a colour so rich it was said to be stolen from twilight. She was surrounded by beauty, by order, by a life so perfectly structured it left no room for a single misplaced thread. And she was suffocating. It was a quiet, gnawing boredom that had little to do with idleness. Her days were full, but her soul was empty. The bustling port, with its shouting sailors and merchants haggling over spices, felt like a play she was forced to watch from a high balcony. The rhythmic crash of the waves on the shore was not a song of freedom, but a lullaby, the relentless beat of a gilded cage. The scent of cedar no longer felt like home, but like the dust of a beautiful tomb. She would stand on her balcony, breathing the familiar air, and feel nothing but a hollow ache, the echo of the dream, where another world, another life, had pulled at her, demanding to be known. Her kingdom was everything a person could want, yet it felt like a prologue to a story that had not yet begun. The loom room was the heart of the women's palace, a space that hummed with its own quiet life. The steady clack-clack of wooden shuttles passing through threads of crimson and gold was its heartbeat, a rhythm that had measured the days for generations. Here, stories were woven into cloth, and secrets were woven into the air. Europa sat with her handmaidens, her fingers moving with practiced grace, guiding a thread of deep blue to form a wave in a tapestry depicting a great sea battle. Around her, whispers flowed like a soft river of gossip. Lyra spoke of a prince from Sidon, whose beard was said to be as fine as spun flax. Chloe sighed over the wedding of her cousin, describing the weight of the golden armbands, the sweetness of the wine. They spoke of dowries and alliances, of which royal house had the finest horses, of who would be the most sought after at the spring festival. Their words were small, warm stones, polished by endless repetition, building the walls of the world they understood. Europa heard them, but the sounds no longer reached her. Their voices faded to a meaningless hum, like bees buzzing outside a sealed window. Their world, once her own, now felt small, a room with no windows. They spoke of binding their lives to one man, one city, one future. She dreamed of being torn apart by two continents. A chasm had opened between them, wide and silent. While they debated the merits of a suitor's wealth, she felt the phantom pull of the nameless woman from her dream, a force as vast and undeniable as the tide. She looked down at the tapestry taking shape beneath her hands. The hero in the scene was sailing toward the edge of the known world, a place where the weaver's threads simply stopped. For the first time, she wondered not about the hero, but about the empty space beyond the woven border. What lay there in the unwoven silence? "He will surely ask for your hand, Europa," Lyra whispered, nudging her gently. "The Prince of Sidon, what will you say?" Europa looked up, her eyes slowly focusing on her friend's eager face. The vastness of her dream receded, leaving only a hollow echo. "I have not thought of it," she said, her voice quiet. The other girls fell silent for a moment, puzzled by her distance. Then the whispers began again, and Europa returned to her weaving, feeling more alone in that warm, humming room than she ever did on the silent shore of her dream. King Agenor watched her from the archway of the grand terrace. His daughter stood alone at the marble balustrade, a slender silhouette against the vast, shimmering canvas of the sea. She did not move, did not seem to breathe, her gaze fixed on the horizon as if it were a page in a book only she could read. He was a king, a man who understood armies, trade routes, and the precise weight of gold. He did not understand the quiet, consuming sorrow that had settled in his daughter's eyes. He saw the shadow that clung to her, the way her smile never quite reached her soul, and he diagnosed it with a father's practicality. It was the restlessness of youth, he decided, the loneliness of a princess with no defined purpose, a flower waiting for the proper vase. He was a man who solved problems, and this was a problem with a clear and glorious solution. His footsteps, usually heavy with the burden of a kingdom, were soft on the marble as he approached. "You stare at the sea as if it holds an answer," he said, his voice gentle but firm. Europa turned, her expression unreadable. "It holds many questions, father," she replied softly. He placed a heavy hand on her shoulder, the great signet ring of his office cool against her skin. "Then I shall give you an answer," he declared, his gaze sweeping over the city and the sea as if he owned them both. "I will find you a husband worthy of Tyre. A king from a land so rich our poets will have to invent new words for his treasures. Your wedding will be spoken of for 100 years. You will be a queen, the greatest of your generation." He spoke of it as a gift, the ultimate prize, a future sculpted from gold and power. But for Europa, each word was a golden bar locking into place around her. The grand wedding was not a beginning, but an ending. The future he described was not a journey, but a destination, a final, unchangeable one. She nodded, a perfect, dutiful daughter, the picture of royal grace. But inside, she heard the quiet click of a lock, and the scent of salt and cedar suddenly smelled only of her beautiful, inescapable cage. High on Olympus, where the air was too thin for mortal lungs, and silence was the native tongue, Zeus watched the world turn. From his throne, he could see the entirety of the human story, a great, sprawling tapestry he had already seen woven 1,000 times over. He had watched empires rise from dust and return to it. He had heard the first word and knew what the last would be. It was all a great turning wheel, predictable in its triumphs and its sorrows. The prayers of mortals rose to him like thin streams of smoke, all smelling of the same fears, the same desires: love, reign, victory, vengeance. The patterns were ancient, unchanging. He was a god, and his greatest curse was the utter lack of surprise. But then his gaze drifted and caught a flicker, something out of place in the grand, boring design. In the heart of the thriving city of Tyre, a single point of stillness on a marble balcony. A girl, At first, he saw what any eye would see, a princess of exquisite form, her hair the colour of dark honey. But he was Zeus, and he saw deeper. He saw the world she was trapped in, the golden threads of her father's promise tightening around her like a net. He saw the meaningless whispers of the loom room, the smallness of the life laid out before her. And then he saw her spirit. It was not a fire, not a storm. It was a quiet, unyielding light, a rebellion in her stillness. He saw it in the way she looked at the sea, not with the eyes of a girl admiring the view, but with the gaze of a prisoner studying a wall. There was a defiance in her melancholy, a longing so vast it created its own gravity. It was a spirit that did not pray, did not beg, did not even seem to know it was being watched. It simply existed beautifully, stubbornly, out of place, and in that moment, the great boring wheel of the world seemed to stutter. It was not lust that stirred in him, not the familiar thunder of divine desire. It was something far more rare for an immortal being. It was curiosity. She was a song he had never heard before, and he found, to his own surprise, that he wanted to learn the words. On an afternoon in late spring, when the sun was warm but the sea breeze still carried a hint of winter's chill, Europa walked beyond the palace gardens. The air inside had grown thick with unspoken things, heavy with the scent of oils and the weight of her father's plans, so she walked to breathe an air that promised nothing. She followed a familiar path that wound toward the royal pastures, where the king's great herds grazed under the watchful eyes of his herdsmen. They were a comforting sight, a sprawling, shifting map of brown and black and spotted hides, their heads bowed to the sweet grass. They were part of the kingdom's wealth, solid and predictable. Her eyes drifted over the familiar scene, seeking nothing, expecting nothing, and then she saw it, a flash of impossible white against the deep green of a distant hill. It stood apart from the others, not merely by distance, but by its very nature. The royal herds were 100 paces away, giving it a wide and respectful berth as if it were a king in its own right. It was a bull, but a bull of a kind she had never seen, not even in the most fantastical tapestries. Its coat was not the colour of cream or bone, but a pure, brilliant white, the colour of sea foam struck by the morning sunday. Its muscles moved with a fluid grace beneath its hide, a display of power held in perfect, effortless check. From its noble head grew 2 horns that did not jut or threaten, but curved in a perfect, silvered arch, like a sliver of the new moon come to rest. It was a creature of myth, a living statue carved from light and silence. But it was its stillness that held her. It was not grazing. It stood with its head raised, and it was watching her. Europa stopped, her breath catching in her throat. Its gaze was not the dull, vacant stare of a beast. It was focused, intelligent, and impossibly direct. It saw past the purple dye of her robes, past the gold in her hair, and looked directly into the restless, lonely chamber of her heart. The herdsman, the palace, the entire world seemed to fade into a hazy dream. There was only the girl on the path and the white bull on the hill, bound by a silent, unnerving thread of recognition. It was not a beast of the field. It was a question, waiting for an answer. The feeling came with the dawn. It was not a dream, but an urge, a quiet hum beneath her skin that pulled her from her bed before the sun had fully risen. The palace felt stuffy, the air stale with yesterday's concerns. She felt a sudden, inexplicable need for open sky and the scent of wildflowers. It was a strange and unfamiliar desire, a clear note of wanting in the usual fog of her melancholy. She found her companions in the courtyard, their morning chatter light and easy. "We should go to the meadows by the sea," Europa announced, the words surprising even herself, "to gather flowers." The handmaidens, delighted to see a spark of life in their princess, readily agreed. Their laughter was like the chiming of small bells as they left the city walls behind, a procession of bright linen and youthful energy moving through the green hills. They walked to the place where the pasture met the sand, a meadow bursting with the untamed colours of spring. Poppies red as a courtier's blush, cornflowers the deep blue of a summer night, and daisies with faces as white and honest as sea salt. They scattered through the field, their voices carrying on the breeze as they chose the best blooms, weaving them into their hair and linking them into delicate chains. The mood was light, free from the heavy tapestry of the court. For a moment, Europa felt like a girl, not a princess, her fingers busy with the simple, pleasant task of making a wreath. Then the world changed. It began subtly. The wind, which had been playing with their hair and carrying their laughter out to sea, simply stopped. The constant, drowsy hum of insects in the grass faded into nothing. The birds that had been singing in the nearby olive grove fell silent. One by one, the girls' voices trailed off, their smiles faltering as they looked around, noticing the sudden, profound quiet. It was not an empty silence, it was a held breath. The air grew heavy, charged with an unseen energy, as if the sky, the sea, and the land itself were all waiting for something to happen. The rhythmic crash of the waves on the shore seemed to be the only sound left, and even that felt distant, muffled. Europa stood perfectly still, a half-finished wreath of red and white flowers in her hands. The urge that had pulled her here was no longer a gentle hum. It was a silent, powerful summons. She was not afraid. She felt only a strange sense of arrival, as if she had walked unknowingly to a meeting that had been set for her before she was born. Into the waiting silence he came. He emerged from the shade of the olive grove, stepping from shadow into sunlight, not with a start, but with a deliberate, flowing grace. It was the white bull. The scattered shrieks of Europa's companions were thin and sharp, like the cries of startled birds quickly swallowed by the profound stillness of the meadow. They stumbled back, hands flying to their mouths, their eyes wide with a primal fear of a creature so large and so untamed. But Europa did not move. She watched, rooted to the earth, the wreath of wildflowers forgotten in her hands. He was not an animal, not in the way she understood. Animals were driven by hunger or fear. Their movements were skittish or aggressive. This bull moved with a calm purpose, a serene confidence that felt older than the mountains. He walked through the meadow, his hooves making soft thuds in the damp earth, and the wildflowers seemed to bow as he passed. His focus was singular. He paid no mind to the terrified girls huddled by the path. His eyes, the colour of warm amber, were fixed on Europa. They held no threat, no wildness. In their depths, she saw a strange and unnerving intelligence, a deep and ancient calm that seemed to speak of forgotten ages, and a wisdom that knew the secrets of the stars. It was a gaze that did not demand or threaten, but simply saw her. He walked until he was only a few feet away, close enough for her to feel the warmth radiating from his body, to smell the clean, sweet scent of summer grass on his breath. And then he did something impossible. He stopped before her, lowered his magnificent head, and knelt. One powerful foreleg bent, then the other, until his massive body was lowered to the ground in a gesture not of defeat, but of profound offering. He knelt at her feet, a living mountain of white, his crescent horns framing a silent, breathtaking invitation. The world held its breath, and in that moment Europa was no longer a princess in a meadow. She was the sole audience to a divine and beautiful mystery. 100 heartbeats passed in the silent meadow. Europa's companions remained huddled together, a cluster of frozen fear, their warnings caught in their throats. But Europa heard nothing, saw nothing but the creature before her. The fear was there, a cold whisper in the back of her mind that spoke of sharp horns and crushing weight, of all the stories she had ever heard about the wildness of nature. But another feeling, stronger and more ancient, rose to meet it. It was not courage, it was curiosity, a deep and resonant pull toward the beautiful mystery kneeling in the grass. Her hand, the one still holding the half-made wreath, trembled slightly. She let the flowers fall, a soft splash of red and white against the green. Slowly, as if moving through water, she lifted her other hand. It felt impossibly heavy, the air resisting her movement. She saw the sun glint on the fine gold bracelet at her wrist, then saw the pale skin of her fingers as they drew closer to that impossible living white. She expected the hide to be coarse, thick like a normal beast's. She expected the smell of earth and animal. She expected to flinch. But the moment her fingertips made contact, the world tilted. There was no coarseness. The bull's hide was softer than spun silk, warmer than sun-baked stone, and smooth as polished velvet. A strange and gentle heat radiated from him, not the simple warmth of a living body, but a deeper, more vital energy, like a slow and steady current of pure life. The warmth flowed from her fingertips up her arm, spreading through her chest until it found the cold, restless place in her heart that had ached for as long as she could remember, and it calmed it. The gnawing boredom, the sense of being caged, the unease from her saffron dream, it all simply dissolved, soothed by a touch more peaceful than sleep. A deep, inexplicable trust settled over her, a certainty that bloomed in her soul without reason or proof. She knew, in that moment, with a clarity that defied all logic, that this creature would never harm her. It was not a beast of the field. It was a silent promise. The fear did not return. It had been washed away by a warmth that still lingered on her skin, a quiet hum that resonated in her very bones. The meadow, which moments ago had felt charged with tension, now seemed bathed in a soft golden light. A smile, the first genuine smile she had felt in months, touched Europa's lips. It was a feeling of pure, uncomplicated delight. Her friends were still statues of disbelief by the edge of the trees, their whispers too faint to reach her. They belonged to a different world now, a world of reason and rules. Europa belonged to this moment, to this enchanted stillness. Her gaze fell upon the wreath she had dropped, a circle of red poppies and white daisies lying in the grass, an idea born not of thought but of a sudden, joyful impulse sparked within her. It was a child's idea, a playful gesture for a creature that seemed to understand things beyond words. She knelt and picked up the garland, the crushed petals releasing a faint, sweet scent into the still air. She stood, and with a new and easy grace, stepped closer to the bull's magnificent head. He did not move. His amber eyes watched her, calm and patient. She reached up, her hands no longer trembling, and gently, playfully, she draped the circlet of flowers over his horns. The effect was immediate and breathtaking. The vibrant red and pure white of the blooms stood out against the impossible white of his hide, a fragile crown for a silent king. The horns, shaped like a perfect crescent moon, held the offering perfectly. For a moment, he was a creature of myth, a living statue adorned with the fleeting beauty of the earth. Any other animal would have flinched, shaken its head, startled by the unexpected touch. The white bull remained perfectly still. He accepted the crown as if it were his due, as if he had been waiting for it. Then he exhaled. It was not a snort or a sigh, but a long, slow release of breath from deep within his powerful chest. The sound was not of this meadow. It was the sound of a far-off wave breaking on a distant shore, the deep and patient sigh of the ocean itself. The sound washed over Europa, not with force, but with a profound sense of peace, sealing the unspoken bond between them. The sound of the bull's breath, like a distant sea, seemed to wash away the last of Europa's hesitation. The world had narrowed to this single sunlit patch of earth, this creature of impossible calm, and a feeling of enchantment so profound it felt more real than her own life in the palace. The structured days, the endless weaving, the suffocating expectations of her father, they all felt like a story someone else had written. This moment, however, was hers. An impulse, stronger than reason, seized her. She wanted to be closer. She wanted to know what it felt like to be carried by something so serene and powerful. The decision was not made with her mind, but with her soul. It was the only thing that made sense. Hearing a nervous titter from the tree line, she glanced back. Her companions, seeing her smile and the crown of flowers, finally let their fear dissolve into disbelief. Their nervous whispers turned into laughter, the light, carefree sound of girls who saw their princess playing a daring game. "Look at her, taming the beast. The king will hear of this." Their laughter echoed across the meadow, a sound from a world she was already leaving behind. It gave her the final push of boldness she needed. She placed a hand on the bull's broad, warm back, feeling the solid strength beneath the velvet hide. With the ease of a girl used to climbing rocks by the shore, she lifted her foot and swung her leg over his back. She settled herself carefully, her fine linen dress spreading over his white flanks. For a moment it was exactly as her friends saw it, a beautiful, thrilling game. The sun was warm, the air was sweet, and the world was perfect. But then she settled fully, her weight sinking into the powerful frame beneath her, and everything changed. The laughter of her friends became a distant, meaningless sound. A deep, resonant hum vibrated up from the bull's body, travelling through her, a power so immense it felt like she was sitting not on an animal, but on the very heart of the earth. It was a low, ancient thrum, a feeling of coiled lightning and restrained thunder. It was the feeling of a god. The game was over. A silent, terrifying, and exhilarating truth had just begun. The deep hum of power beneath her was the only warning. The bull began to rise. It was not a sudden jolt, not the clumsy motion of a farm animal getting to its feet. It was a smooth, inexorable ascent, like a white mountain rising from the earth. He rose with a purpose that sent a tremor of shock through Europa's body. The playful smile on her face froze. This was not a game anymore. The movement was so fluid, so deliberate, that it silenced the world around them. He stood for a moment, a magnificent statue of living ivory against the blue sky. Then he began to walk. He did not walk back toward the pasture or the olive grove. He walked toward the sound of the waves, toward the endless expanse of the sea. The laughter from her companions faltered, turning into confused calls. "Europa, where are you going?" Their voices were thin, carried away by the breeze. She could not answer. She could only cling to the soft hide, her knuckles turning white. The bull's pace was steady, unhurried, yet utterly unstoppable. Each step was a silent declaration of intent. They left the green meadow behind, crossing the pale strip of sand that separated the land from the water. Europa's heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drum against the slow, deep rhythm of the power beneath her. Then his front hooves touched the water. The laughter in Europa's throat died, replaced by a sharp gasp of cold, salty air. The surf, cool and white, swirled around the bull's legs, but he did not hesitate. He walked deeper. The water rose from his shins to his powerful chest, yet his stride never faltered. Her friends were screaming now, their cries of panic and fear reaching her as faint, desperate pleas. But they were figures in a world that was no longer hers. The shoreline, the familiar curve of the bay, the cedar trees on the hills, the entire kingdom of her father began to shrink. The world she knew was becoming a painting, a distant memory, receding with every powerful, impossible step the bull took into the wine-dark sea. The moment the sandy bottom fell away, Europa braced for a lurch, a struggle, the frantic splashing of a land animal caught in the deep. But it never came. There was no chaos, no panicked churning of legs. The bull's powerful stride simply transformed. One moment he was walking on the seabed, the next he was moving through the water itself, his body propelled by an unseen and impossible force. He did not swim, he glided. The water parted before him as if in reverence, leaving a smooth, V-shaped wake behind them. The speed was breathtaking. The shore, which had been slowly receding, now rushed away from them, shrinking with an alarming finality. The frantic figures of her companions became small, indistinct shapes. their desperate cries swallowed by the immense and indifferent sound of the open sea. Soon they were gone, and then the familiar curve of the coastline, the green hills dotted with cedar, even the proud walls of her father's city, all dissolved into a hazy line between the blue of the water and the blue of the sky. Then that too was gone. She was alone in a world made only of water and wind. A raw, primal terror seized her, cold and sharp as the sea spray on her face. She was being stolen. Her life, her home, her future, all of it was vanishing behind her. She slid forward, her hands leaving the soft hide of his back to grasp the horns that rose before her like a crescent moon. She clung to them, the delicate wreath of flowers crushed between her fingers, a fragile, pathetic remnant of the game she had so foolishly started. Yet even as terror threatened to consume her, another feeling rose up, fierce and undeniable. Wonder. The world was a rushing masterpiece of deep blue and brilliant white. He moved with the grace of a living ship, his power an immense, silent engine beneath her. Dolphins, drawn by the strange spectacle, began to leap and play in their wake, their sleek bodies arching through the air as if paying tribute. The sun warmed her back. The wind whipped through her hair, and for a wild, terrifying moment, she felt a sense of freedom more profound than any she had ever known. The two feelings tore at her, a war inside her soul. This was abduction. This was magic. This was death. This was life. But as she looked down at the creature carrying her so swiftly, so purposefully across the endless water, one truth rose above all the others, clear and cold and absolute. This was no mortal beast. Time lost its shape on the open water. The sun rose and the sun set, painting the endless sea in shades of molten gold and deep violet, but the rhythm of their journey never changed. A day was a dome of burning blue sky. A night was a blanket of cold, unfamiliar stars, so bright and close they seemed to whisper secrets just beyond her hearing. The world became a simple, repeating pattern of light and dark, water and wind, and through it all the bull moved onward. He never slowed, never rested, never showed any sign of fatigue. His powerful body cut through the waves with the same relentless, fluid grace, a tireless engine of divine will. He was a constant, a living island in the vast and shifting sea. At first, Europa did nothing but weep. She cried for her father, imagining his rage and grief echoing through the empty halls of his palace. She cried for her mother, for the scent of cedar in her chambers, for the familiar weight of her loom. She cried for her friends, for their laughter and their foolish games in the meadow that now felt a lifetime away. The tears were hot and bitter, a river of sorrow for the life that had been stolen from her. She wept until her throat was raw and her eyes were swollen, until the salt from her tears mixed with the salt of the sea spray on her cheeks. But the sea is vast, and it can hold more sorrow than any single heart. After the second day, or perhaps the third, the tears began to run dry. The grief did not vanish, but it transformed. It became a hard, quiet ache in her chest, a permanent part of the new landscape of her soul. The constant motion, the sun on her skin, the wind in her hair, all began to strip away the girl she had been. Her fine linen dress, once the pride of Phoenician weavers, was now stiff and stained with salt. Her carefully braided hair was a wild, tangled mane. Her skin, once shaded by parasols and garden walls, was burned by the Sunday. She was no longer a princess. The delicate shell of her old life had been cracked and washed away. She was becoming something else, something harder, quieter, and more enduring. A queen, not of a palace, but of the endless, lonely sea, her only crown the memory of crushed flowers. It happened in the deep blue stillness of the fifth dawn. The sky was a pale, bruised purple, and the stars were just beginning to fade. Europa was no longer weeping, no longer even thinking. She was a creature of salt and wind, her body accustomed to the constant rhythm of the sea, her mind emptied by the vastness. She was simply a passenger, a silent observer in a world without land. And then he spoke. The sound did not come from his mouth in the way a mortal speaks. It was a vibration that started deep within his powerful chest, travelling up through his body and into hers, a resonance she felt in her bones before she ever heard it with her ears. The voice was not animalistic. It was the sound of mountains shifting in their sleep, of ancient stone grinding against ancient stone deep within the earth. It was the sound of thunder rolling not from a cloud, but from the heart of the world. Fear not, mortal. The voice filled the space around them, deeper than the sea, older than the sky. Europa froze, her hands tightening on his horns. The shock was so profound it left no room for a scream. It was the final, impossible piece of a puzzle she hadn't known she was solving. All the strangeness, the impossible speed, the serene intelligence in his eyes, it all crashed into this single moment. The world you have lost was a beautiful cage, but a cage nonetheless. Your name was whispered in a single city. I will make it the name of a continent. He did not say who he was. He offered no name, no explanation for his form. He spoke as a fundamental force of nature, a power so immense that a name would only diminish it. He was not a king, not a beast. He was a destiny. He was the promise of a future so vast she could not see its edges, and in his voice she heard the end of her old life and the terrifying, magnificent beginning of a new one. The sun broke over the horizon, and for the first time Europa looked forward, not back, her heart filled with a terrible and wondrous awe. The voice of the bull, ancient and vast, did not speak again. It retreated back into the deep silence from which it had come, leaving only the sound of the wind and the rushing water. But its echo remained, imprinted on Europa's soul. The promise of a new destiny, a name that would define a world, hung in the air around her, more real than the sea itself. She was no longer just a lost girl. She was a vessel, a seed of a future she could not comprehend, carried toward a fate chosen by a power that could command the thunder. Hours passed, or perhaps it was a day. Time had become a fluid thing. Then she saw it. At first, it was just a smudge on the horizon, a slight darkening of the perfect line where the sea met the sky. It was so faint she thought it might be a cloud, a trick of the light on the water. But as they glided closer, the smudge grew. taking on substance and shape. It was land, but it was not the gentle, familiar coastline of her home. This was a dark shape, a rugged and unfamiliar mass rising from the sea like the back of some immense, sleeping creature. Jagged cliffs, black against the afternoon sun, plunged directly into the churning surf. Beyond them, she could see the dark green of dense, untamed forests and mountains that clawed at the sky. There were no welcoming harbours, no plumes of smoke from city hearths, no sign of any human life. It was a primal, wild place, a land that felt ancient and indifferent to the concerns of mortals. This was her destination. The bull did not alter his course by a single degree. He swam for its shore with the same relentless purpose that had carried him across the endless ocean. He was not just arriving, he was returning. As the strange island grew larger, filling her vision, a new kind of fear settled in Europa's heart. It was not the terror of being lost at sea, but the profound apprehension of being found. The long, dreamlike journey was ending. Soon her feet would touch solid ground again, and the promises made by that ancient voice would begin to unfold. She was being carried toward the heart of a great and terrible mystery, toward an unknown fate she had been chosen for, but had never chosen for herself. The rugged cliffs gave way to a small, secluded cove where the water was calm and impossibly clear. The bull did not swim to the sandy beach, but to a patch of green that grew right to the water's edge. It was a small meadow, sheltered and silent, dominated by a single magnificent tree. It was a plane tree, its ancient bark mottled with shades of grey and pale green, its branches spreading wide like a welcoming canopy. But unlike any tree Europa had ever seen, its leaves were a vibrant, deep green, showing no sign of the turning season. It was a tree that did not know winter, a place outside of time. With a final, powerful surge, the bull walked from the sea, his hooves sinking into the soft turf. The long journey was over. He stood for a moment, water streaming from his white hide, and then he knelt, just as he had in the meadow in Phoenicia, offering her a way to dismount. Europa slid from his back, her legs trembling and weak as they touched solid ground for the first time in what felt like an eternity. The earth felt strange beneath her feet, solid and unmoving, a shock after days of constant motion. The bull rose and took 3 steps away from her, stopping directly beneath the shade of the evergreen tree. Europa watched, her heart a quiet drum in the profound silence of the cove. She did not know what would happen next, what this strange new world would demand of her. Then the light began. It started as a faint shimmer around him, like heat rising from a road in high summer, but it grew, intensifying in a heartbeat into a blaze of pure white light so blinding she had to throw her hands up to shield her eyes. The air crackled with energy, smelling of ozone and summer lightning. Through the gaps in her fingers, she saw the form of the bull dissolve, not vanishing, but unraveling, its solid shape breaking apart into a million motes of incandescent light. The brilliance was absolute, a sun born on the shore of Crete. Then, as quickly as it had come, the light collapsed inward, folding into itself until it was gone. The silence that rushed back in was deeper than before. Europa lowered her hands, her eyes adjusting to the sudden dimness of the shade. Where the bull had stood, a figure now stood. He was not a man, not in the way her father was a man. He was taller, broader, his presence filling the space beneath the tree with a silent, crackling authority. Power radiated from him in silent waves. His hair was the dark colour of a storm cloud, his beard thick and regal, and his eyes held the same ancient, knowing calm she had seen in the bull, but now they held the fire of the sky, the depth of ages, and the undeniable weight of a crown she could not see. He was the thunder she had heard in his voice. He was the lightning she had seen in the transformation. Before her stood Zeus. The silence stretched, thick and heavy with unspoken power. Europa stood rooted to the spot, a mortal girl before the living embodiment of the sky. The form was different, but the presence was the same. This was the ancient calm from the bull's eyes, the deep rumble of thunder from his voice, the impossible strength that had carried her across the sea. It all coalesced into this single majestic figure. He was not a monster. He was not a king. He was a truth her mind could barely contain. She did not kneel. She did not weep. She simply watched, her own identity feeling small and fragile, a flickering candle in the face of a star. He took a step toward her, and the very air seemed to part for him. "I chose you, Europa of Phoenicia," he said, and his voice was the same, the sound of ancient authority, but now it was shaped by lips, given warmth by breath. "Not for your beauty alone, though it is a song the world will sing. I chose you for the part of you that dreams of other lands, for the spirit that looks at the sea, not with fear, but with longing. Your cage was gilded, but your soul knew it was a cage. I have not brought you here to conquer you. I have brought you here to begin a world." He gestured not to the small cove, but to the vast unseen lands that lay beyond the horizon, to the west. "This land will be your kingdom. Your sons will be kings and lawgivers, a new lineage of greatness born from a god and a mortal queen. From their blood a civilization will rise. And the continent itself, this new world, will carry your name. It will be called Europa." The words were immense, promises of such scale they were almost meaningless. A continent, a new world. She felt the shape of the words, their weight and their power, but they were too large to fit inside her heart. In that moment, watching the god who had stolen her, she finally understood. She had not been conquered, but she had not truly been chosen either. She had been acquired. She was a beautiful prize, a fertile vessel through which a god would pour his legacy into the world. Her life, her story, her very name was no longer her own. It was becoming a foundation for his grand design. The price of this divinity, of this immortality in name, was the simple, irreplaceable truth of herself. True to his word, Zeus made her a queen. She lived in a palace carved from the island's white stone, where cool breezes whispered through colonnades, and the scent of olive groves drifted in from the hills. Servants with quiet feet and downcast eyes attended to her every need. She wore robes dyed in the richest Phoenician purple, a colour that felt like a ghost of her former life, and ate from golden plates laden with figs, honey, and fresh fish from the sea. To the world, if it had been watching, she was the most fortunate of mortals, a princess elevated to a throne by the king of the gods himself. And Zeus gave her treasures, gifts of such power and wonder that they could only have come from a divine hand. The first was her protector, Talos. He was an automaton, a giant man forged from a single piece of bronze, his inner veins flowing with ichor, the blood of the gods. Each day he circled the entire island of Crete 3 times, his massive feet striding from cliff to shore, his bronze face empty and unflinching. He was a perfect guardian, a tireless wall against any pirates or invaders who might dare to approach her shores. The second gift was a companion, Laelaps, a hound with a lean, powerful body and eyes that burned with a hunter's fire. It was said that no quarry, once sighted by this dog, could ever escape. He was loyalty and relentless pursuit given living form, a constant, warm presence at her side. The final gift was a tool of power, a javelin carved from ash wood and tipped with a point of celestial metal. It was perfectly balanced, cool to the touch, and it was enchanted to never miss its mark. She had only to choose a target, and the javelin would find its heart. They were gifts of safety, certainty, and strength. But as the days bled into weeks, and the weeks into months, Europa began to see them for what they truly were. Talos, the great protector, was also her warden, his ceaseless patrols a constant reminder that the island was not just her kingdom, but her prison. Laelaps, the perfect hunter, was a symbol of a fate that could not be outrun, just as she had been pursued and caught. And the javelin, the weapon of unerring accuracy, felt like a mockery of a life whose course had been so precisely and irrevocably set by another's will. She was a queen in a beautiful cage, and her treasures were merely the gilded bars. The promise of a new world was not just spoken, it was made flesh. In the quiet solitude of her Cretan palace, Europa bore Zeus 3 sons. They were not the result of a gentle, mortal love, but the fulfillment of a divine decree, and their arrival in the world was marked by an almost silent wait, as if destiny itself had paused to watch. The first was Minos. Even as a babe, there was a gravity about him, a stillness in his eyes that seemed to look past the world of toys and lullabies and into the future of laws and kingdoms. He carried the echo of his father's ambition, a king in the cradle. The second was Rhadamanthus, quieter than his brother, with a gaze that was not ambitious but discerning. He possessed an innate sense of balance and fairness, a born judge who seemed to weigh the world in his small hands and find it wanting. The third was Sarpedon, the wildest of the 3, his heart a storm of his mother's passion and his father's fire, a warrior's spirit in a boy's body. They were not like other children. They grew faster, their limbs stronger, their minds sharper than any mortal boy. They did not scrape their knees on palace stones or weep over simple frustrations. Their games were the games of giants, their arguments were the debates of philosophers. Europa loved them with a fierce, desperate love that ached in her chest. She saw the small, human moments, the way Sarpedon's hair curled when it was damp, the rare, sudden smile on Minos's face. But she also saw the god in them, a divine spark she could admire but never truly share. She could not tell them stories of her own childhood, of chasing crabs on the shores of Phoenicia, because their world was one of prophecy and power. How could she explain the simple joy of weaving when their hands seemed destined to hold scepters and swords? They were her sons, born of her body, but they belonged to the grand design. They were living, breathing proof of the unbridgeable distance between the girl she had been and the queen she had become. Their existence, meant to be her greatest honour, was the final, severing blow to her connection with the mortal world. Each of their divine heartbeats a reminder of all she had lost. The years in Crete settled over Europa like a fine layer of dust, softening the sharp edges of her grief, but never truly hiding it. Her sons grew into young men, their divine heritage setting them apart from the world and from her. Her palace was a place of serene beauty, her every need met before it was ever spoken. Yet a restlessness remained, a deep, quiet hum of displacement that no luxury could soothe. She developed a ritual. In the cool of the evening, when the sun bled its final colours into the sea, she would walk the shores of her island kingdom. Laelaps, ever loyal, would pad silently beside her, his presence a warm, familiar comfort. She would walk to the westernmost cliffs, where the land met the endless water, and she would stand there for hours, a solitary queen watching the waves. Her gaze was always fixed to the east, back across the vast, unbroken expanse of the sea. She knew, with the certainty of a navigator, that somewhere beyond that horizon lay Phoenicia, her home, a place that now felt more like a dream than a memory. She could almost smell the cedar on the wind, almost hear the distant clang of a blacksmith's hammer from the city of Tyre. It was a phantom limb, an ache for a life that was no longer hers to live. When the sky deepened from violet to a black velvet strewn with diamonds, her search would change. She would tilt her head back and scan the constellations. The patterns of the stars were a language she had learned as a girl, a map of myths and legends. She saw the great bear and the hunter, the chained princess and the winged horse. But she searched for one shape above all others. She looked for the magnificent creature that had carried her across the water, the one whose back had been her ship, whose horns had been her anchor. She expected to see him there, immortalized in the night sky, a testament to their impossible journey. She searched for the crescent horns, the powerful shoulders, the bright star that would be his intelligent eye. But he was not there. The sky was full of ancient stories, but hers had not yet been written in the stars. The space where the bull should have been was just a patch of cold, empty darkness. And in that emptiness, Europa felt the full weight of her isolation. The bull had been a vessel, a disguise. The story was not yet over, not yet a myth to be told to children. It was still her life, a secret held by a god, and the sky, like the sea, offered no monument to what she had endured. The news of the outside world came to Crete like driftwood, carried on slow tides, and the tongues of the few sailors brave enough to trade in the shadow of the bronze giant Talos. It was from one such trader, a man with sun-cracked skin and eyes full of distant shores, that she learned of her own immortality. He came bearing tribute, not just the usual amphorae of wine and oil, but a scroll of newly drawn parchment, a map of the world as his people saw it. He unrolled it before her on a stone table in the courtyard, its edges weighted down against the sea breeze. It was a crude thing of charcoal lines and hopeful guesses, the familiar coastlines of Phoenicia and Egypt giving way to vast, unknown spaces. The trader, eager to impress the quiet queen, pointed a thick finger toward the lands west of her own island. The lands of the setting Sunday. "We call this whole region after you now, your majesty," he said, his voice full of a pride that was not his own to claim. "In your honor." The word hung in the air, hollow and strange. Europa leaned forward, her eyes tracing the coastline of a world she had never seen, and there, written in bold, hopeful letters across the uncharted territory, was her name, Europa. She reached out and touched the rough texture of the parchment, her fingertip tracing the 7 letters that had once been hers alone, the name her mother had whispered in the lamplight. The name her father had called across the palace gardens. It had been a name that meant her, the girl who dreamed of continents, who loved the scent of salt and cedar. Now it was a place, a destination, a vast empty space to be filled with the stories of others. The trader saw a queen being honoured, but Europa felt an erasure. The terror of the journey, the impossible glide across the water, the feel of the bull's powerful muscles beneath her, the blinding light of the transformation, all of it, the most vivid and terrifying moments of her existence, were being flattened. They were being sanded down and polished into a simple, elegant myth, a god, a girl, a new land. Her personal story was being washed away, and in its place, a legend was being carved. She was no longer the protagonist of her own life. She was becoming the title of a chapter in the history of the world. And so, the seasons turned on Crete, pulling the world forward, while Europa herself seemed to exist in a timeless, quiet present. She reigned. Her court was a place of order and profound peace. Her judgments were known for their wisdom, her rule for its gentle, unshakable strength. The people of her island kingdom revered her. To them, she was not a stolen princess, but the founding mother of their civilization, a queen who had appeared from the sea as a gift from the gods. They whispered her name in temples and sang of her beauty in songs, but they kept a respectful distance. She was a figure of legend, walking among them, wrapped in a solitude so deep it was like a royal cloak. Her sons became men, their divine blood pulling them toward their own grand destinies. Minos, with his mind for laws, began to shape Crete into a power that would echo through the ages. Rhadamanthus became a voice of unbending justice, and Sarpedon a warrior whose name was feared in lands far from the island's shores. They loved their mother, but they were sons of a god, their eyes fixed on the horizons of power and legacy. They moved in a world she could observe but never truly enter. Europa was left to her memories. In the quiet hours, when the duties of the court were done, she was not the revered queen. She was forever the girl standing in a sunlit meadow in Phoenicia. She could feel the impossible softness of the bull's hide beneath her hand, smell the crushed wildflowers, hear the distant, fading laughter of her friends. She remembered the terror and the wonder of that first moment. The bull walked into the sea, the world she knew shrinking behind her. She had been given everything, a kingdom, a legacy. Her name was now a permanent feature on the map of the world, a word that would outlast empires. She was immortalized, but in the silent chambers of her heart, she knew the truth of the bargain she had never truly made. She was forever the girl who had been brave enough or foolish enough to trust a beautiful monster, and in doing so had lost an entire world just to gain a name.